Your snacking routine can get a little dull. Time for a light and fit remix. Like a crunchy storm of graham cookies, caramel pearls, and dark chocolate, showering down into a smooth, creamy yogurt. Enjoy 3 light and fit remix varieties with craveable flavors and up to 120 calories and 10 grams of protein per 4.5-ounce serving. See remixyogurt.com.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Morning, Mrs. Giles.
Hello. Andy here. Thank you for listening to episode 115 of Backlisted on the Diary of a Nobody by George and Weedon Grossmith. I just want to alert you to the fact that the sound quality on this episode is not everything that we might have wished. As you'll be aware, we're recording Backlisted under quite challenging circumstances at the moment. We had a few technical troubles while we were recording the episode, and then when we played the different feeds back, we found that the gremlins had got into them too. But we didn't want to lose the episode because Laura and Edward were such great guests, and because we all love the book so much. So we hope you enjoy this episode of Backlisted. We apologise if the sound quality isn't quite up to our normal standards, but we hope it doesn't spoil your enjoyment too much. Anyway, this episode of Backlisted was recorded on Thursday the 25th of June 2020 and reflects the language and social attitudes of its time.
Morning, Mr. Taylor.
Laura, where are you?
I am about half a mile away from Clapham Common, where there are currently, I think, something in the region of about 1 million people, most of them with nothing on.
Oh,
it is so
in a bad
hot.
way.
Sounds good.
Yeah. They've been there all the way through the virus. So if you've got it, it's come from them.
Okay. We should say we're recording this on Thursday the 25th
Thursday,
of June,
the 25th of June.
2020. It's the hottest day of the year. I don't know about everyone else who I'm talking to at the moment, but it's very unpleasant in here, in my little box.
Sticky.
Edward, where are you?
I'm holed up in Hitchin in Hertfordshire, and I'm dying. This is no fun for the hirsute gentleman.
Did you used to live in Broadstairs, or do you still have a place in Broadstairs, or what?
I used to live in Broadstairs, but that was nice. But I'm probably going to mention the fact that I fess up to the fact that I lived in Basingstoke, which I think is... I saw when I was reading your article the other day, Andy, that you were complaining about Croydon being terrible and you have problems with people saying how shit Croydon is all the time.
I really do.
That is nothing compared to coming from Basingstoke.
So you're trying to out-suburb me with your... I'll see your Basingstoke and raise you a pearly.
I always thought there was a level between, crap towns, which was obviously tended to go towards the kind of Cumbernaulds and the Hulls and the and the Skelmersdales. Actually, dull towns would be a good book, wouldn't it? I mean, towns in which almost nothing happens and there is almost nothing of value, kind of inspired by Betjeman's Slough.
Well, we may encounter that poem later in the podcast.
We may.
I tragically moved from Brighton to Basingstoke when I was 7 and thought it was better. So
we're going to deal with all these topics at some length in the hour ahead. So why don't we crack on?
Shall we crack on? Hello and welcome to Backlisted, the podcast that gives new life to old books. Today, you find us in Brickfield Terrace, a pleasant street in the agreeable North London suburb of Holloway, standing outside a nice 6-room residence with a garden running down to the railway line and a boot scraper outside the front door that seems to bark the shin of every tradesman that visits. I'm John Mitchinson, the publisher of Unbound, the platform where readers crowdfund the books they really want to read.
And I'm Andy Miller, author of The Year of Reading Dangerously. And joining us today are returning guest Laura Cumming and new guest Edward Higgins. Hello, both of you.
Hello.
Edward, you must know that obviously I really wanted to find, given we have one guest called Cumming, I really wanted the second guest to be someone called Going or Gowing because of the book that we're talking about. But we've got a Higgins, so that's good news.
Good.
Good news for fans of My Fair Lady or Magnum PI.
Higgins and Cumming could definitely be a double act in this book, couldn't they?
If you like Hancock's Half Hour, Higgins is a hilarious surname. So Bert Higgins is their go-to idiot. So
Yes.
Again, we may be hearing something from that later on in this podcast. So Laura is returning for her second visit. She first joined us in December 2016. Goodness me. To discuss Jane Gardam's A Long Way from Verona. And let's just say that that's still one of my favourite books that I had not read before Backlisted, which I read because of Backlisted. And I know many listeners will feel the same way. So once again, Laura, thank you so much for... I'm now going to reveal that Jane Gardam's editor came up to me at Marks and Spencer's at St Pancras Station and thanked me, the podcast, and you and Hilary Murray Hill for talking about Jane Gardam and that wonderful book on the podcast. So thank you. Laura is the Observer's art critic and wrote The Vanishing Man, a book about Velázquez that's centred on a Victorian bookseller who resembles the eponymous hero of today's book in certain touching ways, and which featured in the B.S. Johnson episode. I talked about The Vanishing Man in that episode as well. And last year she published a memoir about her mother's strange early life on Chapel Sands, which we featured in the Ray Bradbury episode. So we are big fans of Laura's work on Backlisted.
We are.
Laura's mother once bound and illustrated an edition of the book we're discussing today as an art student. Laura's only other claim of connection. Why don't you tell us, Laura, what is your other connection?
Well, I'm afraid my claim of connection is actually very Pooterish because I used to live in a long time ago when I first came to live in London. I got the luck of having a sort of, completely barren bedsit. But the barren bedsit was in a beautiful Georgian building owned by the Portman Estate, and it was down the side of the Wallace Collection in London. And on the front of the building were 2 blue plaques. And the first was for Captain Marryat, who wrote Children of the...
New Forest.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Great. And the other one was George Grossmith. And I was incredibly excited by this because of my love of the book that we're about to discuss today. And it's only very recently, when communicating with Edward Higgins, who is coming on also later, as you know, that I discovered that it's not the George Grossmith at all.
Oh.
And in fact, I suppose it's probably his son, is it, Ed? I don't know. But anyway, it says
his son,
actor
yeah.
and manager on it. And I got it wrong. He was in Dorset Square around the corner. But I think I might have preened a bit in a Pooterish sort of way.
It was
and we're still doing so until this week.
Oh, it was George Grossmith Feast rather than
Yeah.
George Grossmith Pear.
It was, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Well, that your status as a Diary of a Nobody super van takes a bit of a knock there, Laura. But
Laura, I did tell you to style it out, and you haven't done. So,
and we're also joined today by Edward Higgins. Edward is the author of one novel, Conversations with Spirits, which was published by Unbound in 2013 and was shortlisted for the Guardian First Book Award. He's the former editor-in-chief of The Bluffer's Guide and the current editor-in-chief of a free app called Sidekick, helping people with mental health issues. Last year, he wrote introductions and annotations for the book under discussion today. So he is a bona fide expert. He wanted me to say he isn't, but listen, he really is. He is a Diary of a Nobody expert.
A super fan.
And he is currently writing, producing and performing a new podcast set to go live this week called Lars Head Supernormal. Is that right? Is that right?
Yeah. I didn't think you mentioned any of this. Okay. Let's go with
Which also contains readings from the eponymous hero's autobiography, There Is No Life, based on the novel by Victorian psychic Florence Marryat, of whom more later.
Oh.
And he's also finishing a novel based on the book we're here to discuss, which is
The Diary of a Nobody by George and Weedon Grossmith, first serialised in Punch magazine in 1888 to 1889 and published in volume form by J.W. Arrowsmith, a publisher in Bristol, in 1892. It has been in print ever since. But before we mount the horse-drawn cab for Holloway, Andy, what have you been reading this week?
Well, it's the latest instalment in a series of books that I've been talking about on the last few episodes of Backlisted. I've been reading a book called The Local, which was written by Maurice Gorham with illustrations by Edward Ardisoni. And I'm assuming listeners will all be familiar with Edward Ardisoni's work, but Laura, if they aren't, given that you are an art critic, could you tell them in 10 seconds about Edward Ardisoni?
Edward Ardisoni is absolutely benign, wonderful drawings. They are softly rounded, little groups of figures in these sort of solid grouped scenes, and the staging of the events, little dramas that he shows are very larky. He did wonderful drawings of the Second World War, and even those drawings, which might have been in other hands, very devastating to look at, they've got a sort of, Fellini-esque, garrulous merriment to them. And I don't think anyone looking at his these beautiful colour, graphic line and watercolour illustrations for so many books that we loved, I don't think anybody isn't made better by looking at them.
Two of the greatest children's books ever published, in my view. Stig of the Dump.
Anyway.
The Otterbury Incident, which isn't as well known, but ought to be read. It's one of my...
Oi, my 5 minutes is ticking down.
Sorry. I'll shut up.
So I came to this book, The Local. I'm going to read out the captions of some of the illustrations. Obviously, we can't show you the illustrations because this is audio, but I'm going to read out the captions of some of the illustrations in a minute. But I came to this book because it was mentioned alongside John Piper's Brighton Aquatints, which I talked about a few episodes ago, and High Street by Eric Ravilius and J.M. Richards. And it's of a piece with Romantic Moderns, which is another book that I've talked about on the podcast, and Square Haunting, which I talked about on the last episode. And I bought this. I bought this book, The Local, at Christmas, and I just have to tell you, listeners, I'm really sorry because since I purchased this, I've realised it's such a wonderful book. It was republished by Little Toller about 10 years ago, but it's out of print. So it seems like I'm taunting you. I really don't mean to, but it's actually quite expensive to buy a copy now. So I'm very sorry in advance because you will want to get hold of a copy of this book. What it is, it was published in 1939. It's a book about pubs. Gosh knows we're all keen to revisit pubs under safe circumstances. So what The Local does is it takes us through the pubs of London just before the Second World War. And in fact, this is quite a rare book before it was republished because, like John Piper's Brighton Aquatints, lots of copies were either lost or destroyed during the war, and getting paper was obviously an issue as well, and the kind of paper that could sustain illustrations and colour illustrations. And so it's like the book is like a little portrait of what pubs were like in London in the late 1930s. And we meet the regulars, solitary drinkers, barmaids, groups of customers, a guide to food in pubs, the general tenor of which is don't eat in pubs. It's sort of, and they talk about tin whistle musicians, and they talk about the games that are played in pubs, and there's a fantastically useful glossary of terms, a few of which I'll just read out here. But it tells you, for instance, what beer means in a pub in this era. A generic term for all malt liquors. It is sometimes used to include even stout. If you ask for beer in a London pub without specifying what beer you want, you will probably get bitter. So it talks you through the different types of drink. It talks you through the fact that you would go in and get different types of beer mixed together. So, John, you would ask for a pint of bitter and stout.
Light and bitter.
You know, but this is the thing I wanted to ask you, John. So a man can build a powerful thirst reading this book.
Yeah.
And there's a draft beer called Burton, presumably the from which we get the phrase "gone for a Burton."
Yeah.
I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing that might be the case.
Yeah.
No, it's a suit. It's a suit.
Ah, okay.
It's a
All right.
suit.
No,
Sorry.
great.
Well,
That's good to know. You know, you weren't living in George Grossmith's house, and so there we are. Burton, a draft beer, darker and sweeter than bitter, called originally after the great brewing town of Burton-on-Trent. Burton is also known as Old. Popular compounds are BB, bitter and Burton, and old and mild and Burton. Some pubs keep a special Burton, which is more of a strong ale and makes an excellent mixture with mild, having more body than the ordinary Burton, even when mixed. Many pubs do not keep Burton during the hot weather, counting it a winter drink. So, it features in this book regularly. And it made me want a pint of Burton more than I've ever wanted any drink. You haven't got any, Johnny, have you?
I haven't, but I know that it is. I think it is being made by people still. I'm gonna find some.
No, here's the thing: Fuller's Brewery in Chiswick, where I used to live.
Yeah,
not the brewery, Chiswick, is currently selling Burton to a 1931 recipe, or in their past masters range, it's 7.4% proof. And is 3.7 units a bottle. So you would disregard the daily units intake just by drinking a bottle of this. But unfortunately, it costs £45.
Oh.
So if anyone from Fuller's is listening and regards that as product placement, I'm easy to find. Or any listeners who happen to have a spare bottle of Burton lying around from 1931.
We should make our first recording post, as it were, lockdown. Definitely, that's something we need to have on the table, I think, don't you?
Wouldn't that be amazing?
It would.
Well, I'll just read a tiny bit. So this inspired me back in January when I first read this book to go on a little tour of Mews pubs because I was so taken with this description of the Mews pub. A pub in a mews, and I went to in around Knightsbridge and round the back of Buckingham Palace. I went to the Grenadier and the Horse and Groom and the Star Tavern in the space of an afternoon, in a sort of very genteel pub crawl. And this is what Maurice Gorham says about Mews pubs. The most obvious advantage of the Mews pub is that it lies to some extent off the main track, and you can therefore get a spurious sense of discovery or knowledgeableness out of going to it. Equally, if you are a furtive drinker, its air of secrecy may appeal to you. To turn down the Mews and then duck into the pub is less embarrassing to the easily embarrassed than to walk boldly into a pub on the main street. Apart from these psychological points, pubs in Mews often have real advantages. Often you find pubs in the Mews when the streets themselves have none, and on the whole, Mews pubs are quieter than pubs in the street. And it goes on about the sort of people who might drink in a Mews pubs, and it talks about the nicest Mews pub I have come across is the White Hart in Brooks Mews North, not far from the Bayswater Road. Listeners, I can tell you it was demolished in 2002. So don't look for it, Spinal Tap would say. It's not there anymore. So some of the illustrations by Ardisonian here are called, just give you a sense of it, Saloon Bar at the Prince Alfred, Public Bar at the George, the Jug and Bottle at the Green Man. It's the most beautiful thing. Anyway, that book was published by Little Toller. If someone from Little Toller is listening, you ought to reprint this, really. I don't know what the rights issues are, but everyone should read this. But another wonderful book that I discovered as a result of our friends at Maidstone and John Piper's Brighton Aquitance. Thank you, John. What have you been reading this week?
I've been reading a novel by American novelist called Percival Everett. It's called I Am Not Sidney Poitier. It is one of the funniest things I have read for many years. Everett is the author of 18 other novels. This was published first by Grey Wolf in America in 2009, and it's taken 11 years, bafflingly, to be published in this country, which it's now been done with some style by Influx Press, Kit Kalis at Influx Press.
And Gary Budden, our former guest on Backlisted.
Indeed. It's a comic novel. The eponymous hero is called, he's called by his mother, not Sidney Poitier. I mean,
I am not Sidney Poitier.
Yeah, it's literally so and it's rather like Darling in Blackadder. That joke runs through the whole book. In fact, I'm going to read you a little bit where it comes up. You know, people say, "What's your name?" He says, "I'm not Sidney Poitier," and they say, "No, but what's your name?" "I'm not Sidney," and so on.
Okay.
It's very, very funny, but it's also incredibly clever. If I'm going to compare it to anything that I've read recently, it's in the kind of George Saunders short story, Francis Plugg, How to Be a Public Author, Andrew Sean Greer's Less. I mean, the plot is absurd. His mother, he has a 2-year gestation. Behind it all is Tristram Shandy. It's that kind of playful, ludic, abstract novel.
Yeah, okay.
His mother has has him in the womb for 2 years. He doesn't know whether this is true or not, but he's born. She invests in Ted Turner's TV channel and makes a massive amount of money. So he's born in LA. His mother leaves him, dies when she's young, leaves him lots of money. He buys his way into college. He tries to get into a fraternity and decides he doesn't want to be part of a fraternity. Ted Turner, it becomes a friend of his, is a sort of kind of ominous grise philosopher who guides him on his passage to adulthood. The other character who guides him to his passage to adulthood is Percival Everett, an English professor who spouts kind of postmodern nonsense in the lectures, but who gives him some good kind of personal advice. There's so much incident in the book, but one of the things he does is he sends him on 2 trips outside of Atlanta, where he's at university. One is to Peckerwood County in Georgia, where he's arrested for being black and thrown into prison, and he has to escape from prison. So there's a whole kind of ridiculous, really well-written, exciting passage where he's chained to a cracker, a kind of a sort of stupid white guy who he has to escape with, and they get rescued by a couple of hillbillies, and he manages to get back to Atlanta. And then at the second journey out, he ends up in Smut-Eye, Alabama, where almost the same thing happens again, except he decides he's going to use his vast wealth to help these elderly women to build the church that they want to build. Anyway, it delivers, I think, on almost every level. It never stops being funny. It never stops making you realise that what the book is to some degree about is the identity of being a black American, an African American, and how identity is continually being foisted upon you. And he does that with a subtlety. Yeah. There's a great introduction by the wonderful novelist Courtier Newland, who says at the beginning of the book, he said that Percival Everett has been ignored by the publishing industry because he's not considered black enough. And Courtier says, I'm an author who considers himself ignored by the industry because my work is too black. I mean, what I will definitely be doing is reading more of the novels. There's a brilliant bit towards the end where the Percival Everett character, one of the other characters, in fact, Ted Turner says, I read your book Erasure, which is a real book by Percival Everett. He said, I didn't like it. And Percival Everett said, I didn't like it much either. But in a sort of John Irving-y way.
Yeah,
anyway,
it sounds really great. And it also sounds, it's really good that Influx, it's a not insignificant thing for Influx to take this and do it, It really reminds me of they might, and they probably would still do it, but it's very much the sort of thing that Canongate under Jamie Byng were doing about 20 years
the other
ago,
person, Dan Rhodesy, it's got that as well. It's right. But it doesn't drop a stitch. I couldn't recommend it highly. Let me read you a little bit from it.
Let's hear a bit.
He's here talking to Percival Everett in the canteen. He's about to go to the parents in a scene that really reminds me of the movie Get Out. He's going to go and see his girlfriend. Not only is he called not Sidney Poitier, he looks like Sidney Poitier. So there's that double thing going on all the way. So he's asking for advice. And here was I going to invite you over to my place for Thanksgiving, Everett said. Really? No. We were sitting in the student centre. He picked at a muffin. I'm sure you'll have a fine, memorable time in Washington. Young Miss Larkin seems very nice. I think she's quite bright, though I'm not a good judge of these things. Her old boyfriend will be there, I said. He has to be someplace. Why does that make you nervous? He's the old boyfriend. What if she still has feelings for him? Better to find out sooner than later. Of course he was correct, but I was finding little comfort in that fact. It's just that I like her so much. You're rapidly becoming a boring fellow, Everett said. Have you had sex with her? I believe that's my business. I'll take that as a yes. I don't really think we should be talking about this, I said, and looked out the window. Okay, relax. Don't get your no-doubt patterned bloomers in a clove hitch. I drummed my fingers on my thigh, upset that I was not relaxed. But I said, I'm relaxed. What about her parents? Are you nervous about meeting them? Extremely. Well, don't tell them that you've seen their baby naked. That's my best piece of advice. Thanks a lot. And be yourself. Who else would I be? I don't know. You might suddenly decide all of a sudden that you are Sidney Poitier. You're not, you know, though you do look alarmingly like him. Tell me, who do I look like? I looked over his facial features. His sad but alert brown eyes were too close to his face. His lips were strangely thin. His large nose looked like it had been broken several times. I could think of no one he resembled. I don't know many actors, I finally said. What about Roscoe Lee Brown? I don't know who that is. Come on, you know Roscoe Lee Brown. He was all over the television. Maybe he still is. He was in The Cowboys with John Wayne. I don't much like John Wayne, but Roscoe Lee Brown was great. Anyway, you'd know him if you saw him, he said. I know you would. What about Bill Cosby? You look nothing like Bill Cosby, I said. Thank the Lord, Everett said. If only there were such a thing. But seriously, you have to know that you look more like Sidney Poitier than Sidney Poitier ever did. Have you ever seen In the Heat of the Night? No. It's a beautiful love story, that movie. Let me hear you say, they call me Mr. Tibbs. They call me Mr. Tibbs, I said. No, say it as if a crab is biting your ass, as if something is peeling an unpleasant and undesired memory from your core, as if you're feeling a little bitchy, as if you might be gay, but even you don't know. I said it again. Uncanny. You ever do drugs? I shook my head. That's too bad, but hardly surprising. He stood, looked out the window at a Spelman girl in a short skirt, and then down at me. Enjoy your break, and remember, be yourself, unless you can think of someone better.
Very good. Very good.
We'll be back in just a sec.
I'm Cindy Lauper with fellow Cosentix advocate, Chef Michelle Bernstein.
We'll share our experiences with plaque psoriasis, with psoriatic arthritis, and Dr. Panico will talk about the possible connection.
Cosentix secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis 300 milligram dose and adults with active psoriatic arthritis 150 milligram dose. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentix. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some are fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur.
Learn more at 1-844-COSENTIX or Cosentix.com/Cindy.
Let me ask you first, Laura, when did you first discover The Diary of a Nobody?
Well, earlier than I think, by the sound of it, because I used to dance to that music at Miss Middleton's dancing class in Edinburgh when I was about 6.
Oh, how brilliant.
So, I mean, we all sang that music, so yeah, it's lovely to hear it. I heard The Diary of a Nobody read aloud by my mother when I suppose I was about 8. And she had loved it for many years. And as you said at the beginning of the program, she had done an illustrated version of it herself. Anybody listening to this is bound to have a copy of it somewhere in their house. So are all their forebears, and there are hundreds of different versions of it. Weedon Grossmith himself, I think, incomparably illustrated it, but loads of artists, including Artisoni, have actually wanted to do more with the characters in the book. The sort of wonderful, list of perk-ups and putleys and poshes and pits and so on are kind of irresistible to English.
Wow, that was a lot of P's right there. Well,
yeah, exactly.
You did well there.
It is great. But I remember being read aloud very well because my brother and I we would be lying in our beds next to each other in a tiny little room with, my mother sitting in between us. And my brother would howl with laughter at certain points, and I would cry. And I still feel very strongly that the great feat of this book is to be so very funny and so very poignant. So that is my earliest memory of it.
Well, all readings are valid. Edward, can you remember when you first came across Grossmith or The Diary of a Nobody?
I can.
Why not tell me?
Yeah, I could do that. I bought it at a jumble sale, because I'm classy, when I was about 9 years old. And I think it cost about 5 new pence. And my main interests at that point were the Victorian period and Hancock's Half Hour. And this kind of was basically everything for me. So it was those two things that kind of cemented together.
Your annotations for the edition that you published last year are a lovely mixture of fact and a personal commentary, and in the nicest possible way as a reader, that I felt looking at them that I was being treated by someone whose enthusiasm was palpable in how they felt about the book.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I think you. I've been basically reading this book every year all my life, and the weird thing is that my affiliations with the book change. When I was young, when I was 10, I loved Lupin and the Holloway comedians, and now as a horrible rank old man, I'm much more sympathetic to Pooter.
This is exactly the same experience that Evelyn Waugh had, didn't he? He had exactly that. He read it and he was on the side of Lupin, and then as you get older, you see more to the.
Well, we're very similar people, John, as you know.
Comic novelists, yes, let's be sure.
If for any reason there's anyone listening to this who doesn't know The Diary of a Nobody, and if they don't, they kind of do, because it's so seeped into the culture anyway. But I want to play you a clip of a reading of the very beginning of the book. This is my favourite audiobook reading of all time. It's by the late Arthur Lowe, most famous as his part of Captain Mannering in Dad's Army, but of course an actor who worked in all sorts of spheres. And he recorded The Diary of a Nobody for the BBC in 1975 or 77. This has been available commercially, but it hasn't been available commercially for quite a long time, and it's not available in the digital realm. So this is rather a hissy recording, because I took it off the cassette and then I cleaned it up to the best of my ability. But here is Arthur Lowe reading the beginning of The Diary of a Nobody.
Why should I not publish my diary? I have often seen reminiscences of people I have never even heard of, and I fail to see, because I do not happen to be a somebody, why my diary should not be interesting. My only regret is that I did not commence it when I was a youth. Charles Pooter. After my work in the city, I like to be at home. What's the good of a home if you're never in it? Home, sweet home. That's my motto. Now for my diary. April the 3rd. Tradesman called for custom, and I promised Farmerson, the ironmonger, to give him a turn if I wanted any nails or tools. By the by, that reminds me, the bells must be seen to. The parlour bell is broken, and the front door rings up in the servant's bedroom, which is ridiculous. April the 4th. In the evening, Cummings unexpectedly dropped in to show me a meerschaum pipe he'd won in a raffle in the city. He told me to handle it carefully, as it would spoil the colouring if the hand was moist. He said he wouldn't stay, as he didn't care much for the smell of paint, and fell over the scraper as he went out. Must get the scraper removed, or else I shall get into a scrape. I don't often make jokes.
Oh, it's so good. Well, I
so
think
good.
it is anyway. Laura, you don't love that reading though. Do you want to say why?
I don't love that reading. It's not that I don't love the reading, Andy. I don't think anybody has ever read it better. And as everybody knows, in this programme, there are numerous recordings of it. And, he beats Martin Jarvis into a cocked hat. But It's that I
really does. He really does.
But that's not my my worry is not to do with the extraordinary high quality of that reading. It's that I don't want to hear it read. It probably goes back a bit to listening to my mother or maybe something like that. I know, but for me, Arthur Lowe, when he reads, it becomes Mannering, Captain Mannering, and Captain Mannering stands between me and Pooter. So I don't really want to. I don't want to hear that, and the reason I don't is because, as I was saying earlier, I really treasure, as everybody on this podcast does, I'm sure, I really treasure Pooter. He's terribly pompous, and his puns are absolutely appalling and so on. But he's also terribly modest, and the world divides somewhat on this subject, and no doubt we'll be discussing it. But what I feel about him is that the real comedy of this book, which I think can only be in silence on the page, is to do with the fact that when he tells his day, and we've just heard it beautifully read, as you say, by Arthur Lowe, when he tells his day, he is telling you all of the stupid things he's done, all the minor pomposities, all the unbelievably irritable vanities that he has and so on, and then he's giving you his comeuppances. So he tells you about the things that led up to the humiliations of which this book is replete, and he does so with this complete candour, which really, I think, marks him out against, if I could throw this one down, all the people who have drawn from this character and made sitcoms and so on out of it. I'm afraid I haven't read Edward's novel yet, so I don't know what you
no one has.
I'll be really interested to hear. Okay. But I think that what I worry about in this book, and obviously the book is very much about hope and a certain arrogance and great expectations and so on, all of which are, comically deflated, and it always ends for him in humiliation. And when I was a little girl on that bed, that was what made me cry, because I felt he wasn't Captain Mannering so much as Godfrey. So he was this figure who was, always humiliated, always humiliated. He was the man who, if he'd been an older gentleman, he'd have been the one who had to go home because he had to relieve himself, like poor Godfrey. So
why were you crying at Pooter?
Because of those reasons I'm saying. Because every single time he gets into this sort of dilemmas, I don't cry about him now, Edward. Don't worry, I have grown up over the age of 8. But I did at the time, and I suppose what I feel is that he's one of the reasons I think this is such a masterpiece of prose. He is a truly humble creation, actually, insofar as he writes it all down. He doesn't just come along and tell you that everybody was terrible to him and they were all appalling. He tells you all the things that happened to him that led to these ridiculous humiliations, many of which he deserves. And so for me, when you hear Arthur Lowe reading it, you're hearing what is essentially, because of his brilliance and because of the character he plays, a kind of dramatisation of the book. And it isn't a drama to me. It is this very intimate piece of comic writing.
Okay, before I go to Edward, may I just say that I've got two very straightforward readings why I love Arthur Lowe's reading. The first is just technically, as in terms of the delivery, the things that he's getting the laughs off in the bit that we listen to are exquisite. The persistent timing is incredible, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, you talked about Martin Jarvis. We're not singling Martin Jarvis out. I'm also throwing Hugh Bonneville into this bin. I can't stand, right, because the genesis, for better or worse, of Diary of a Nobody is in Punch and is kind of based in some kind of hatred of the middle class or the lower middle class. And then they kind of, as it goes on, they lose some of that. So the early passages, particularly the bits we've just heard, they're laughing at clerks, which is a big thing for high culture in that period, is sneering at the suburbs. But as the book goes on, that falls away, it seems to me. I can't stand any adaptation or audio reading if the person speaks like that. Oh, Mr. Pooter, I'm Mr. Pooter, and they tripped over the scraper because we're common and we're sort of that interpretation is laughing at Pooter and that class of people. Whereas what Arthur Lowe does is warm that through. You know, he takes it out of the realm of that kind of sneering and brings it into a more universal place. So that's why I love it so much anyway. Edward, where do you stand on the great Arthur Lowe issue?
I love Arthur Lowe, obviously. He was, my favourite thing in the world when I was a child was Mr. Men. So...
Of course.
I would like to buy some potatoes, said Mr. Greedy. So, I mean, where do you go wrong with that? And there's nothing. So, I don't think he's as ridiculous as Captain Mannering. I think he's a little more subtle than that. But, I mean, it's a brilliant reading because Arthur Lowe is brilliant at reading. So, there's loads of other versions out there. Don't obviously go for the LibriVox recording. Never do that.
I mean, one never would. But are there any recordings? I wish I'd found a recording by an American doing it. There must be some, right?
No, it's never really taken off in America. That's one of the peculiar things. It's just never happened. Orwell thought that it should have been translated into Russian because he thought it was like Chekhov.
I think that's fair, don't you?
Which I think is pretty good.
Orwell complains about the name of the house in Coming Up for Air. He's whinging about the names of various horrible houses that just have the same name, and the Laurels is the first one he picks. So
you should have called it Coming Up for Air, Gowing Up for Air. So we've got normally we'd read a blurb now on Backlisted, but we've got a guest to come in and give us a description of the book. Here's a clip of the late film director Ken Russell, recorded in 2004, talking us through the plot and the themes of The Diary of a Nobody.
Yes, I love the 19th century. One of my very favourite books from that century is George and Weedon Grossmith's The Diary of a Nobody. In fact, I loved it so much I made a film for the BBC on it, which was shown in the 60s. It was liked so much it was never shown again. Actually, the publishers didn't like the way I treated the subject. A bit controversial. But the story is about a very amiable sort of fellow. He's a clerk in a business establishment in the city. He lives at the railway cuttings in Holloway, and the house is called the Laurels. He's married, wife Carrie, and a renegade sort of son called Lupin. And but he tries to emulate, I guess, the upper middle class a little instead of the class he's in, which is sort of lower middle. It's a diary of trivia, misunderstandings, arguments, petty annoyances, mostly with tradespeople and clerks at the office where he works, and even his own son and wife, and even his friends. But it's a very amicable thing, and as the mistakes and the trivialities which cause him a great deal of concern grows, so your love of the character grows with it, or it does as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, spot on.
That's pretty good, isn't it?
Spot on.
I think that's spot on. Laura, have you got a bit of the Diary of a Nobody you could read to us?
Yeah, I should say that as I like you, Edward, when we change over with our, you like Lupin and then eventually you like Pooter, or you sympathise, or your empathy is in that direction. For me, I think it runs all the way through every kind of comic trope, actually, it seems to me. So it has, slapstick, and it has running gags, and it has esprit de l'escalier, and it has wonderful satirical sends-ups and so on. And there are moments in it that I suppose would be, they were theatre people, George and Weedon Grossmith, as you said at the beginning. And I mean, there are moments that would, and this is what I think is one of the genius aspects of this book, that would look absolutely brilliant on stage and have been done on stage. I mean, there's a marvellous bit where he goes to a firework party and the enormous, incredibly expensive Catherine wheel that everyone is always waiting to begin doesn't begin, and of course it's he, of all the people at the party, who taps it and immediately falls off the wall. And you read these moments in the book would be wonderful visual gags, but they're also beautifully written. I think he's a genius for combining the two.
They're about mortification.
All about mortification. All
that he's always doing saying
Yeah.
the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing and knowing it.
Yes, which is why I think I love him so much, because he does it.
Yeah.
He's irritated enough to do it, or he's stupid enough to do it, or he's immodest enough to do it. Then he does it, and then he gets his punishment. And all of these things are written down so brilliantly. I mean, Ken Russell. So weird hearing Ken Russell talking about his tutor, isn't it?
Hey, I meant to say that his adaptation it's all about YouTube, Diary of a Nobody. Of course it is. Ken Russell's adaptation is on YouTube at the moment. I don't know how long it'll last. It's clearly been uploaded from a slightly dodgy copy, but it's really worth watching. It's very good, and he treats it as a silent film with narration.
Oh, brilliant! I'd love to see it.
It's about, and it was a monitor, so it's like 50 minutes or something like that. Anyway,
well, I was
going
to just read a little bit, because it's obviously Pooter has a very happy marriage. And given that we're supposed to be laughing at him, this seems to me to be another great feat of wonderful writing.
Yes,
as a portrait of
absolutely.
a marriage. Honestly, I have read this book myself at times in my own life where I've thought, Christ, I wished I had his marriage. It's so genial. They never kind of have a flash. They're the most... the greatest point of friction, I suppose, is the diary itself, which is another bit of wonderful sort of almost...
the borders pun. Come on.
No, well, absolutely, there are others. But, when he's really disappointed in his wife, it's because she doesn't love his diary, isn't it? It's because she wasn't listening, or she was doing the laundry, or she doesn't care.
Well, that's the moment where he is Pooterist.
Where he's the most Pooter. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I completely. But otherwise, I think this book is suffused with this rather kind of tender marriage, and when the wretched Lupin announces that he's going to marry Daisy Mutlar, a tremendous neologisms of names in this book all the way through, and it's obviously sort of going to be a very premature engagement, because he's only just come back from being chucked, another neologism, by the is it Oldham, I think, where he's been in a bank, and so he's met this woman. She's obviously going to be completely unsuitable. She's considerably older. She's quite loud, and she's got really heavy eyebrows, which Weedon Grossmith, in the great illustrations that run through the book, shows.
Yes.
So you hear it's always
Indeed.
laid out so well by publishers, I think, and by originally as it appeared. If you see these drawings in the V&A where they are, you see how well publishers have used them over the years, squashing them down, and and you turn the page to find out what Mutlar looks like. Sorry, Daisy Mutlar looks like, and sure enough, she's horrendous looking, a gargoyle really, almost. And so they're very worried. And my reading is simply this: they are very worried about this marriage. The engagement's just been announced. Carrie and I talked the matter over during the evening and agreed that it did not always follow that an early engagement meant an unhappy marriage. Dear Carrie reminded me that we were married early, and with the exception of a few trivial misunderstandings, we had never had a really serious word. I could not help thinking, as I told her, that half the pleasures of life were derived from the little struggles and small privations that one had to endure at the beginning of one's married life. Classic Pooter, this. Carrie said I had expressed myself wonderfully well, and that I was quite a philosopher. And, of course, he has to brag, but she's right, and he is, and so I love him for that. So it's a beautiful character.
Brilliant.
The slang element there. Laura was talking about the slang in Diary of a Nobody. So there are numerous terms, aren't there, that hadn't entered the English language.
Right, the two that I've written down are chuck, where Lupin says he's got the chuck from his job and that one of his speculations is a dead cert. Both are cited by the Oxford English Dictionary as being the first.
So dead cert and chuck are two of the terms. Mitch, have you got any more?
Well, apparently bussing was another one, and blithering. The first use of the term "blithering idiot" is recorded in.
That can't be the case, surely.
Well, the first time blithering is in the OED is in 1868. that's that first time blithering, but in association with idiot. So, but basically, that Lupin's slang is, as I think we mentioned earlier, the slang was kind of controversial because it was, he was a fast talker. He was kind of he was speaking often in ways that his father didn't understand at all.
Was he a swell? We think he might be a swell.
I think he might have been a swell. Yeah.
The use of slang is a tell to the contemporary reader, isn't it? That's the point. There were, in etiquette guides in this era, you were advised never, if you wanted to be respectable in the way that Charles Pooter does, then you would not indulge in slang because people would think the less of you. So part of the friction in the original reading, if you were there then, was the freedom with which Lupin employs all manner of slang terms and the offence that it causes his long-suffering parents. So we were talking earlier about the influence of the Diary of a Nobody and how it seeps into the culture. And one of the ways in which it seeps into the culture is the Pooterish character, the word Pooterish in the OED, obviously, but also how it's reflected in...
Yeah, I've got an issue with that, by the way. I don't think Pooter is Pooterish.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Yes.
I don't think he's Pooterish. The beginning of every chapter is basically about him telling jokes and being silly and doing nice things. And he dances his wife. He does a polka on his in his living room, and that's not a Pooterist, is it?
I tell you what, Edward, every time I hear somebody use the word Pooterish, I think, oh, right, yeah, you hate people from Croydon like me. Yeah, that's what you mean by Pooterish, yeah. I get you. I see you.
There's a marvellous moment which Matthew Sweet mentions in his book too, is where when they're doing the charades, he suggests the game, he comes in as the Blondin Donkey.
Yeah.
And that was like one of the biggest, kind of most sensational acts, that was a tightrope walking donkey.
Yeah.
And just little bits like that where you think that Pooter's, he's a bit more hip and a bit more down with stuff than he lets on.
Well, look, here is, I pulled together a selection of clips of characters from British sitcoms that I think owe a debt to Charles Pooter and to the Grossmiths.
I've got it all down in my diary.
I didn't know you kept a diary, Tub.
Of course I keep a diary. All great men keep diaries. Old Pepys and Boswell, Shaw, all we literary Herberts. Every little thing that happens in my life goes down in this book. Well, you never know. They might want to publish it in years to come or put it on the radio every day.
What's happened in your life that could be of any value to anybody else?
They will probably marvel at me perspicuity.
What's that?
It doesn't matter what it is as long as people marvel at it.
So what should we do then? You choose. We could change the spark plugs on the automobile.
Spark plugs don't really set me alight, Martin. I think you should know that.
Fancy varnishing something?
Not really. Look, why don't we do something we used to do? Badminton. Now, we haven't played badminton for ages.
I wouldn't give that big head at the leisure centre the satisfaction.
Well, what's he got to do with it?
He thinks he owns those courts. I said to him, when I book a court for half an hour, I said, I expect half an hour, not 28 minutes.
When was this?
3 years ago.
Come friendly bombs and fall on Slough. It isn't fit for humans now. Right. I don't think you solve town planning problems by dropping bombs all over the place, so he's embarrassed himself there. Next. Come friendly bombs and fall on Slough to get it ready for the plough. The cabbages are coming now. The earth exhales. He's the only cabbage round here.
Hello, I'm Alan Partridge, and I'd like to tell you about a very special place. Whether you know it as East Anglia, the Plump Peninsula, home of the Broads, although that sounds like a refuge for fallen prostitutes, Albion's hindquarters, or quite simply, the Wales of the East. This is Norfolk.
Oh, glorious.
So in order, we had Tony Hancock in Hancock's Half Hour, Martin Bryce, played by Richard Bryars in The Great Ever-Decreasing Circles, David Brent, played by Ricky Gervais in The Office, and Alan Partridge, played by Alan Partridge in a trailer for Mid-Morning Matters with Alan Partridge. I think that's what that was from. I've got a question. So I'm going to ask Laura first and then Edward. Kind of, does The Diary of a Nobody work as a novel?
Well, as I say, I think it works brilliantly as a novel. And I marvel at the way that they pick up the editorial problems that they've got, such as the point at which Punch suddenly decides to stop publishing issues. Punch itself, I think, wasn't published for a few months. And when they pick up again, he says, Pooter says, so, these pages of my diary have gone missing and someone's taken them. Who's taken them? And then there's a great long comic, a really brilliantly placed comic unfolding that runs through many pages, and during the course of which he's searching for which servant is it who could have done this, who could have, and so on. And so they're very limber, these writers, and they shaped the book according to, I'm saying the book because in a way, obviously, we all know that in Victorian era, everybody was serialising stuff and so on. And I don't know, Edward will know, I'm sure, I don't think that they knew this was going to be published as a book, but it's shaped like that. I mean, we know it begins with a scraper and it ends with a scraper. It begins with enamel paint, it ends with enamel paint. It's beautifully symmetrical, and it goes through a sequence of humiliations which I think are sort of climaxing in the scene that I think, Andy, are going to read from later on. That moment where we see him listen to a front on, I think he's supposed to be a parody of Frank Harris, the American writer. We see him front on in front of 10 people, all named. This vicious attack, is sent in his direction. And he is gradually realising that the man with the soft head and the soft body and the soft brain and the soft hair and the soft life and the soft, stupid figure, soft suburban man, is him, and that he is himself being mocked. To me, the only really very strong political point in a book which keeps its politics very carefully and subtly balanced all the way through is when this scene occurs and he is thinking about what is just and what is right and money and so on. And the book then comes gradually round to a sort of a slow crescendo and then a sort of finale, which I feel by that stage they must have known was going to be a sort of completing circle. And, it ends beautifully. I mean, I would argue that there are moments in the last quarter that, maybe they could have, I don't know what kind of deadline they were working to, whether they had to very rapidly turn out and so on. But so I think it does, nobody who reads this book doesn't end up loving Pooter somewhat by the end. And that is the absolute evolution of a character in a novel.
Edward, what do you think? Does it work as a novel?
Yeah. It's probably a very satisfying novel that nothing really happens in. And I really like that as a book. It's a very unusual book insofar as fuck all happens, but everyone's really... It's just a lovely read, and it's funny, and I've got a line that I think that I might have as my epitaph that is from this book, and it says, "I swept out of the room in silent dignity, and I caught my foot on the carpet." and I genuinely can't think of a better way of explaining my life. I mean, it's an amazing book. So
it reminded me of that thing Matt Groening said about The Simpsons, that when they were originally pulling The Simpsons together, one of the things that they agreed upon was that for every extremely in pop culture reference they made in the script, they must remember to put in a gag with Homer hitting his head or hurting himself. So that they have the right balance between, because they're playing to a mixed audience, and that they have the right balance between physical jokes and intellectual jokes. And actually, funnily enough, again, the correlation between The Diary of a Nobody and sitcom rather than The Diary of a Nobody and fiction is different types of joke run all the way through the book. It's very interesting as a comedy writer to see how they...
This book did not do well on first publication, and it was only in 1910 when I think it was its third publication that it did all right. And there is an amazingly horrible quote from the Athenaeum magazine.
Please give us that quote.
The republication of Punch's The Diary of a Nobody by G. and W. Grossmith was hardly a happy thought or calculated to profit anyone. For it must be confessed that the book has no merit to compensate it for its hopeless vulgarity.
Blimey.
Not even that being amusing. The satire, if a photographic representation of middle-class boredom can be dignified with this name, is not only dreary, but also has a cruel ring which is positively offensive. Such jibes argue unpardonably for the taste of the maker. It causes no hilarity in the reader. Besides, it is so dull. And then it ends with this. The illustrations by Mr. Weedon Grossmith are admirably suited to the text.
Well, we won't be inviting the reviewer of the Athenaeum on to discuss
That's
this
pretty
book.
fucking harsh, isn't it?
Oh. Hey, now, well, John, you know, and John and Nikki will know that on Backlisted, the ultimate accolade that any book can receive is, has it been made into a West End musical? And in the case of The Diary of a Nobody, it hasn't been made into a West End musical, but it has been made into an off-West End musical. Laura, are you a big fan of musicals? Yes or no is fine.
No, totally not.
It's an understandable perspective. Could you tell us a bit more about Weedon Grossmith and about Weedon's illustrations? Because we don't think that Weedon contributed to the text, do we?
I'm kind of touched by the fact that it's always described as a book by George and Weedon Grossmith, because I don't know what we do know about that. I mean, it seems obvious that there's a very strong voice in it, but, they were great brothers, and they worked together and they were on the stage together and so on.
I think they did co-write it, though, didn't they?
They did co-write
Yeah.
it. Well, lots of people think they didn't. I don't know.
His pictures weren't there until it was published as a book in
1892.
1892. Thank you.
And so we do therefore know they must have written it together, because it was always described as being by both of them. So well
Right,
done, Weedon,
okay.
on every front.
Well done, yeah.
The pictures are, you can see some of these drawings if you want. When lockdown's over, you can go and look at them in the V&A. And I think they are the best things he did. Weedon's gift it's so light. At the beginning of this podcast, you were talking about Artisoni and Revilius and John Piper, and it was making me think of that wonderful book, which please may I recommend in this programme, by Tom Lubbock, my very esteemed, great former art critic of The Independent, who died some years ago, but who adored Pooter. And he wrote a book called English Graphic, which deals with, all these different ways in which we have found to laugh at ourselves as British people. And Weedon Grossmith is a footnote in there, and it's a very great book, very funny in itself.
Well, I was going to read a bit from the book, but then I thought, well, why would I read a bit when I've got Arthur Lowe here to carry that particular weight? And also, the reading of this is so tremendous. This is the bit that we were talking about earlier, about Hardfur Huttle. And it really says something profound, I think, about the suburban mindset which Pooter represents. If you listen to this, you can hear him doing anything in the teeth of someone being quite rude to him and about people like him, and coming out with the upper hand. I think so, anyway. Here it is.
May the 10th. Received a letter from Mr. Frounching of Peckham, asking us to dine with him tonight at 7 o'clock to meet Mr. Hardfur Huttle, a very clever writer for the American papers. I must say it was quite a distinguished party. And although we did not know anybody personally, they all seemed to be quite swells. I sat next to Mrs. Field at dinner. She seemed a well-informed lady, but was very deaf. It did not much matter, for Mr. Hardfur Huttle did all the talking. He is a marvellously intellectual man, and says things which from other people would seem quite alarming. Mrs. Purdick, who seemed to be a bright and rather sharp woman, said, Mr. Huttle, we will meet you halfway, that is, till you get halfway through your cigar. And that, at all events, will be the happy medium. I shall never forget the effect the words happy medium had upon him. He positively alarmed me. He said something like the following. Happy medium, indeed. You know, happy medium are two words which mean miserable mediocrity. I say go first class or third. Marry a duchess or her kitchen maid. The happy medium means respectability, and respectability means insipidness. Does it not, Mr. Pooter? I was so taken aback by being personally appealed to that I could only bow apologetically and say I feared I was not competent to offer an opinion. He continued with an amazing eloquence that made his unwelcome opinions positively convincing. The happy medium is nothing more or less than a vulgar half-measure. It is half-hearted, respectable, in fact, a happy medium, and will spend the rest of his days in a suburban villa with a stucco column portico resembling a four-post bedstead. We all laughed. That sort of thing, continued Mr. Huffle, belongs to a soft man with a soft beard, with a soft head, and a made tie that hooks on. It seemed rather personal, and twice I caught myself looking in the glass of the chiffonier, for I had on a tie that hooked on, and why not? If these remarks were not personal, they were rather careless.
Edward, I've got an observation that Kate Flint makes about the Diary of a Nobody in relation to where she says that one of the reasons why the Diary of a Nobody continues to resonate or has been so popular for so long is it does a brilliant simultaneous thing, which it allows the reader both to identify with but also feel superior to one's neighbour. It's like reading about somebody who lives next door or in the same street or who one works with and sympathising with.
I've got an issue with this. That's my life. That is genuinely my life. I live Pooter's life. I put up everything I put on Facebook. I say, I've done this today. People go, yeah, you didn't know. And I go, no, I did. I did this. And so everything I do is basically, I mean, this is why it is the perfect lockdown book, because meeting people is awful. And you should never ever meet people. You should just stay in your home and be alone and
paint things.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, thanks very much, Edward. Thanks very much, Laura.
Both supers, if not swells, for polishing up a comic classic, to Nicky Birch for catching the conversation and turning it into a capital show, and to Unbound for allowing us to turn a meat tea into a slap-up feed.
You can download all 114 previous episodes. Plus, follow links, clips and suggestions for further reading by visiting our website at backlisted.fm. And we're always pleased if you contact us via Twitter or Facebook.
You can also show your love directly by supporting our Patreon at www.patreon.com/backlisted. We started this to keep Backlisted afloat in uncertain times. We don't no longer get money from anywhere else, and we'd prefer not to have intrusive paid-for adverts. Even a small gesture of financial support helps. All patrons get to hear Backlisted episodes early, and for half the price of a bottle of cheap fizz, Lock listeners get 2 extra Lock Listeds a month, our mental green room, where we talk, cry, chortle and swear about music, film, TV, as well as books.
You also get to hear your name read out on the show as a mark of our thanks and appreciation. And so John is going to lead off this week's batch of Lock listeners.
Thank you to Dan Richards.
Dan Richards, who, and this is a coincidental, he's coming on, he's a guest next time.
Yeah. It's amazing. Thank you, Dan. To Raki Rao, to Philippa Swan, to Janet Norman, to Rachel Cole, to Ruth Imrie, to Sarah Wasley, to Jude Cook.
Former guest.
Jude. Yep. To Sorrel Hirschberg, to Deborah Candiub, to Carol Octoloni, to Darla Hanny, to Sarah von Offusian, to Robert Harvey, to Lynn Bullock,
to Julia Croydon. It's not spelt the same way as Croydon, but it's close enough. Lucy Maydill. To the Soup. Thank you, Andrew Lee, Cameron Martin, Sue Smith, Rebecca Demarie, Matthew Heen, Simon Slightholme. Thanks, Simon, my fellow XTC fan. Stephen Banger, Andrew Nunn, Mrs. Miller, and yes, it's that Mrs. Miller.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller.
Helen Watling, Lisa Anderl, William Welsh. Thanks, everyone. Thanks very much for supporting Backlisted and Locklisted. We'll be back in a fortnight.
Back in a fortnight. See you then. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. That's
Thank
right.
you. Thank you.
If you prefer to listen to Backlisted without adverts, you can sign up to our Patreon. It's www.patreon.com/backlisted. As well as getting the show early, you get a whole 2 extra episodes of what we call Locklisted, which is Andy, me, and Nikki talking about the books, music, and films we've enjoyed in the previous fortnight.